The rusty iron shackles had left angry red marks on Sophia Reynolds' wrists as she sat on the wooden auction platform in Willow Creek's dusty town square. Her honey-brown hair fell forward, partially concealing the fatigue etched across her delicate features. 7 months pregnant, her rounded belly strained against the faded blue dress that had been hastily donated by the church ladies, women who offered pity but no real solutions. Sophia kept her eyes downcast, refusing to meet the calculating stares of the men gathered below, men who assessed her value like they would livestock at the county fair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The April sun beat down mercilessly on the small Montana settlement, as Sheriff Blackwood cleared his throat to address the crowd. Next up for labor contract auction, Mrs. Sophia Reynolds, age 24, widowed 3 months past. Contract terms are standard, 5 years of service to work off debts. Opening bid starts at $30. A murmur rippled through the assembled men. $30 was steep for a woman in her condition, especially one who wouldn't be able to perform hard labor for at least 2 months after the baby came. "What skills does she have?" called out a ruddy-faced man near the front, chewing on the end of a cigar. The sheriff consulted his notes. "Some education, can read and write, experience as a seamstress and in household management." $15, offered a voice from the back. Sophia's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. 3 months ago, she had been Mrs. Sophia Reynolds, wife of Thomas Reynolds, living in a cozy cabin on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Thomas had been a skilled carpenter, his hands creating beautiful furniture that brought in steady income. They had been saving for the baby's arrival, dreaming of the family they would build together. Then came the robbery at Henderson's General Store. Thomas had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, gunned down by desperate men who escaped with little more than the day's meager earnings. $20, called another voice, pulling Sophia back to her grim present. Sheriff Blackwood frowned slightly. "Come now, gentlemen, Mrs. Reynolds has considerable skills. Her late husband's debts must be settled." After Thomas died, Sophia had discovered the extent of their financial troubles. Thomas had borrowed heavily to expand his workshop, convinced that larger commissions would soon come his way. The bank had been patient at first, offering condolences along with payment extensions. But patience had quickly worn thin when Sophia couldn't make the payments. Her sewing work wasn't enough to cover the mounting debts. The final blow came when illness had confined her to bed for 2 weeks, leaving her unable to earn anything at all. "$25, said a voice that sent a chill down Sophia's spine. Ezra Walsh owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory. His wealth was matched only by his cruelty. Stories circulated about how he treated those who worked for him, especially women. He had buried 3 wives already, though no one dared suggest the deaths were anything but tragic accidents. "30, called someone else, and Sophia allowed herself a small breath of relief. On the edge of the crowd stood Ethan Calloway, watching the proceedings with thinly veiled disgust. At 32, he had built the Broken Sea Ranch from nothing into one of the most respected properties in the territory. 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and eyes the color of a summer storm, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his own worth. The silver streak that ran through his otherwise dark hair was the only outward sign of the losses he had endured. Ethan hadn't come to town for the auction. He needed supplies and had planned to interview potential ranch hands at the saloon afterward. But something about the pregnant woman on the platform had stopped him in his tracks. Perhaps it was the dignified way she held herself despite her circumstances, or maybe it was the memory of his own wife, Rebecca, who had died in childbirth 3 years earlier, taking their unborn son with her. $40, Walsh called, his thin lips curving into what might have been a smile if it contained any warmth. Sophia's heart sank. Walsh was determined, and no one in town would dare outbid him for long. 50, came another bid, but Walsh quickly countered with 60. Ethan found himself moving closer to the auction platform, studying the woman more carefully. There was something in her eyes, not defeat, but a quiet determination that spoke of inner strength. She reminded him of Rebecca in that way, though physically they were nothing alike. Rebecca had been fair-haired and delicate, while this woman had an earthy beauty that seemed rooted in resilience. $100, Walsh announced loudly, silencing the crowd. It was an exorbitant amount, more than double what most labor contracts went for. Sheriff Blackwood looked surprised, but pleased. $100 from Mr. Walsh. Do I hear any other bids? A heavy silence fell over the gathering. No one was willing to challenge Walsh, especially not at that price. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 100 going once. Sophia felt cold despair washing over her. Walsh's reputation was well known. Women in his household were little more than servants by day, and often something worse by night. What would become of her baby in such a place? Going twice. $200. The clear, firm voice cut through the tension like a knife. All heads turned toward Ethan Calloway, who stood with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. Walsh's face darkened with anger. "What's your game, Calloway? 200 for damaged goods." "Mrs. Reynolds is a person, not goods," Ethan replied evenly, "and I'm in need of someone to manage my household." 250, Walsh countered, his small eyes narrowing. 300, Ethan responded without hesitation. The crowd broke into astonished whispers. $300 was more than most men earned in 6 months. Walsh's face flushed with fury, but even he had limits. "She's all yours, Calloway. Hope she's worth it." He spat on the ground and stalked away. Sheriff Blackwood looked stunned as he brought down his gavel. "Sold to Ethan Calloway for $300. As Ethan approached the platform to complete the transaction, Sophia finally raised her eyes to look at her purchaser. His face was weathered from years under the Montana sun, but his eyes held a kindness that caught her off guard. Still, she had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. "Mrs. Reynolds," Ethan said quietly, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "I'm Ethan Calloway. My ranch is about an hour's ride from town." Sophia studied him warily. "Why did you pay so much for my contract, Mr. Calloway?" Ethan seemed taken aback by her directness. "Walsh isn't known for his gentle treatment of those under his care. I couldn't stand by and watch." "So it was charity," Sophia said flatly. "Call it what you will," Ethan replied. "But I do need help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, isn't getting any younger, and the place could use a woman's touch." Before Sophia could respond, Sheriff Blackwood approached with papers for Ethan to sign. "Standard contract, Mr. Calloway. 5 years of service in exchange for debt settlement. Room, board, and basic necessities provided." As Ethan signed his name, the sheriff unlocked Sophia's shackles. She rubbed her wrists, wincing at the raw skin exposed now that the iron bands were removed. "Do you have any belongings, Mrs. Reynolds?" Ethan asked. "Just this." Sophia indicated a small cloth bundle beside her. It contained a change of clothes, Thomas's pocket watch, their marriage certificate, and a tiny hand-knitted baby blanket, all that remained of her former life. Ethan nodded and helped her down from the platform, noticing how she winced slightly. When her feet touched the ground, "My wagon's this way. We should get you settled before dark." As they walked through town, Sophia felt the stares of townsfolk, some curious, some pitying, some disapproving. She had known most of these people all her life, yet when disaster struck, not one had stepped forward to truly help. The church had offered prayers but not shelter. Neighbors had brought food but not employment. In the end, their charity had run out faster than her options. Ethan's wagon was well maintained, with a padded bench seat that looked more comfortable than anything Sophia had experienced in weeks. He helped her climb up, then secured her small bundle before walking around to take his place beside her. "I brought supplies for the journey," he said, indicating a canteen of water and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Abernathy packed some bread and cheese if you're hungry." The mention of food made Sophia's stomach growl audibly. She had been given a meager breakfast at dawn, but nothing since. Reluctantly, she accepted the package, unwrapping it to find fresh bread, cheese, and even a few slices of apple. It was more food than she had seen at once in weeks. As they left Willow Creek behind, the tension that had held Sophia rigid began to ease slightly. Whatever awaited her at the Broken Sea Ranch, it had to be better than Walsh's homestead or the sheriff's jail cell where she had spent the past 3 nights. "You should know," Ethan said, after they had traveled in silence for several miles, "that I have no expectations beyond what I stated at the auction. You'll have your own room and privacy. I need household help, not anything else." Sophia glanced at him, surprised by his directness. "Most men who pay $300 expect a return on their investment, Mr. Calloway." "I'm not most men, Mrs. Reynolds." The simple statement hung between them as the wagon rolled through the Montana landscape. Spring had painted the rolling hills in vibrant greens, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the gentle breeze. In another time, another life, Sophia might have found the scenery beautiful. "Your baby," Ethan said after another long silence. "When is it due?" "About 2 months," Sophia replied, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Mid-June, the doctor said." Ethan nodded. "We have a good doctor in these parts. Dr. Sullivan comes by the ranch regularly to check on Mrs. Abernathy's arthritis. I'll make sure he sees you when he visits next week." Sophia felt a flicker of surprise at this thoughtfulness. "That's kind of you." "It's practical," Ethan corrected, though something in his tone suggested there was more to it. "A healthy mother means a healthy child." As the wagon crested a hill, Ethan pointed ahead. "There it is, Broken Sea Ranch." Sophia gasped despite herself. The ranch was larger than she had imagined, spreading across a verdant valley with mountains rising in the distance. The main house was built of sturdy logs and river stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property, a large barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. Cattle grazed in the distance, and horses moved about in a corral near the barn. "It's beautiful," she whispered, before she could stop herself. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "It's taken 10 years to build it into what you see. Started with nothing but that small cabin there." He pointed to a structure near a grove of trees. As they approached the main house, the door opened and an older woman emerged onto the porch. She was small but sturdy-looking, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're back early," she called as Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. "And with company, I see. Mrs. Abernathy, this is Mrs. Sophia Reynolds. She'll be helping with the household," Ethan explained as he helped Sophia down from the wagon. Mrs. Abernathy's keen eyes took in Sophia's condition, the faded dress, and the weary set of her shoulders. Understanding seemed to dawn on her weathered face. "Well then, let's get you inside and settled. You look ready to drop where you stand, child." There was kindness in the older woman's voice that made Sophia's throat tighten unexpectedly. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with genuine compassion that she wasn't quite sure how to respond. "I'll see to the horses," Ethan said, sensing that the women needed time alone. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you to your room." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Polished wooden floors were partially covered with hand-woven rugs. The furniture was sturdy but well crafted, with cushions that looked invitingly soft. Windows let in ample light, and a massive stone fireplace dominated the main room. "Come along," Mrs. Abernathy said, leading Sophia up a wide staircase. "We've got a nice room prepared. Mr. Calloway said to make sure it has everything you might need." "He knew I was coming?" Sophia asked, confused. Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "No, dear, but he mentioned stopping by the auction in town. Given his heart, I suspected he might not come home alone." The bedroom was larger than Sophia had expected. A four-poster bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall. A dresser, washstand with porcelain basin, and rocking chair completed the furnishings. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the small table by the window, which overlooked the mountains to the west. "This is too much," Sophia said, overwhelmed. "I'm just hired help." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy replied firmly. "Everyone deserves dignity, especially a mother-to-be. Now sit yourself down while I fetch some hot water for washing up. Then we'll have some supper." Left alone, Sophia moved slowly around the room, touching the quilt with disbelieving fingers. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the simple comforts nearly undid her composure. She sat in the rocking chair, allowing herself a moment of rest as she gazed out at the landscape. What kind of man was Ethan Calloway? What had driven him to spend such an outrageous sum on a pregnant widow's labor contract? Charity seemed the most obvious answer, but there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, a recognition or understanding that suggested his motives were more complex. Mrs. Abernathy returned with hot water and fresh towels, along with a clean dress. That looked to be about Sophia's size. "This was Rebecca's," the older woman explained, seeing Sophia's questioning look. "Mr. Calloway's late wife. She was a bit taller than you, but I think it can be adjusted to fit." "His wife?" Sophia hesitated. "I couldn't possibly. She's been gone 3 years now," Mrs. Abernathy said gently. "The clothes do no good sitting in trunks. She would have wanted them used." While Sophia washed and changed, Mrs. Abernathy shared more about the ranch. "We've got 6 ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse, cook meals for them, and Mr. Calloway in the main kitchen. The men take turns with chores and cattle depending on the season. Mr. Calloway runs a tight ship, but he's fair. Never heard him raise his voice, not even when that fool Jenkins let a whole herd through a broken fence last spring." Dressed in the borrowed gown, which was indeed a bit long but otherwise fit well enough, Sophia felt more human than she had in weeks. Soft cotton was a luxury compared to the rough fabric of her old dress. At dinner, Sophia met the ranch hands, weather-beaten men who removed their hats and spoke politely before digging into Mrs. Abernathy's hearty stew. Ethan sat at the head of the long kitchen table, occasionally joining the conversation, but mostly observing with those thoughtful grey eyes. "Mrs. Reynolds will be helping around the house," was all he said by way of explanation for her presence. The men accepted this without question, though Sophia caught curious glances directed her way. After the meal, when the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy to her own quarters off the kitchen, Sophia found herself alone with Ethan in the main room. He stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames with an expression she couldn't read. "Mr. Calloway," she began hesitantly, "I feel I should thank you properly for what you did today." Ethan turned, his face half in shadow. "No thanks necessary. Mrs. Reynolds, I did what any decent person would do. $300 goes well beyond decency," Sophia pointed out. "I need to understand what you expect from me in return." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I expect you to rest until that baby comes. After that, if you're willing, help Mrs. Abernathy with household duties. She's getting on in years and shouldn't be managing everything alone." "That's all?" Sophia couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "That's all," Ethan confirmed. And when your 5 years are up, you're free to go wherever you choose." Sophia studied him, trying to discern his true motives. "Why, Mr. Calloway? Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes returning to the fire. 3 years ago, my wife Rebecca died in childbirth. Our son, with her. His voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of pain. "When I saw you on that auction platform, about to be sold to a man like Walsh," he shook his head, "some things a man can't stand by and watch." The simple honesty in his voice touched something in Sophia. "I'm sorry about your wife and son." "As I am about your husband," Ethan replied. "Mrs. Abernathy told me he was a carpenter." "Yes, Thomas could make something beautiful out of the most ordinary piece of wood. He said he could see what was hiding inside, waiting to be revealed." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. "Sounds like a man of vision." He was, Sophia agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss, but not very practical when it came to money. "I didn't know until after he was gone, that we were so deeply in debt. Few of us are prepared for how quickly fortunes can change," Ethan observed quietly. They fell into silence, but it was surprisingly comfortable. The crackling fire and the distant sounds of night creatures created a peaceful backdrop to their shared understanding of loss. Finally, Ethan straightened up. "You should rest, Mrs. Reynolds. Tomorrow will be soon enough to learn the routines of the house." As Sophia climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a fragile sense of security. Whatever Ethan Calloway's reasons for bringing her to his ranch, she believed his promise that she would be safe here, at least for now. In her room, Sophia stood by the window, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. The baby moved within her, a reassuring flutter that reminded her she wasn't truly alone. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined solely by survival. "We'll be all right," she whispered, one hand cradling her belly. "Somehow, we'll find our way." As she drifted off to sleep, in the unexpected comfort of the four-poster bed, Sophia couldn't know that fate had more surprises in store, that the connection between her and Ethan Calloway ran deeper than either of them could possibly imagine, and that the child she carried would be the key to unlocking secrets long buried in both their pasts. Sophia awoke to the gentle sound of birdsong filtering through her window. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The soft bed and clean sheets were so different from the hard cot in the sheriff's cell or the threadbare blankets of her abandoned home. Then reality came, rushing back. The auction, Ethan Calloway's unexpected bid, the Broken Sea Ranch. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly where the baby stirred with morning activity. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting golden patterns across the polished wooden floor. From somewhere downstairs came the faint sounds of activity, pots clanging, voices murmuring, the rhythms of a household already in motion. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Mrs. Reynolds, are you awake?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice called. "Yes, come in," Sophia replied, quickly smoothing her hair. The older woman entered carrying a tray with a steaming cup of tea, fresh bread, and a small pot of preserves. "Thought you might appreciate breakfast in bed your first morning," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "No need to rush downstairs just yet." "That's very kind, but I should earn my keep," Sophia protested, though the aroma of the food made her stomach growl audibly. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Plenty of time for that, after you've regained your strength. Dr. Sullivan will be stopping by later today. Mr. Calloway sent for him first thing this morning." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise. "Already? But I thought you said he visits next week." "That's his regular schedule, yes. but Mr. Calloway was quite insistent that you be checked over immediately. Mrs. Abernathy moved to the wardrobe and opened it to reveal several dresses. These were Rebecca's. I've selected the ones that might accommodate your condition with some minor adjustments. Sophia stared at the garments, all made of quality fabrics in subtle, tasteful colors, so different from her own worn clothing. I can't accept these, she said softly. Nonsense, Mrs. Abernathy replied firmly. Rebecca would have wanted them used, especially by someone in need. She was generous to a fault, that one. Something wistful crossed the older woman's face. So much like her mother. After breakfast, feeling somewhat revitalized, Sophia, dressed in one of Rebecca's simpler gowns, a sage green cotton that Mrs. Abernathy had quickly altered to accommodate her pregnancy. The fabric felt luxurious against her skin after months of making do with increasingly shabby clothing. Downstairs, the ranch house revealed itself more fully in daylight. What Sophia had taken for simple comfort the night before now showed itself as thoughtful design. The main living area was spacious yet cozy, with bookshelves built into the walls and comfortable seating arranged to take advantage of both the fireplace and the views outside. Photographs in silver frames dotted the surfaces, though Sophia didn't pause to examine them closely. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a brief tour, pointing out the formal dining room used primarily for special occasions, the study where Ethan kept ranch, records, and the large kitchen that served as the heart of the home. Everything was well maintained, but lived in, the mark of a house that was truly a home. "Where is Mr. Calloway this morning?" Sophia asked as they returned to the kitchen. "Out with the men since dawn," Mrs. Abernathy replied, checking something simmering on the stove. "Spring carving season keeps everyone busy. He'll be back for dinner midday, though." The morning passed quickly as Sophia familiarized herself with the household. Despite Mrs. Abernathy's protests, she insisted on helping with simple tasks: folding laundry, polishing silver, arranging fresh flowers from the kitchen garden. The activity felt good after weeks of enforced idleness in the sheriff's cell. Around noon, the sound of horses and men's voices announced the return of the ranch hands for their midday meal. Through the kitchen window, Sophia watched as Ethan, dismounted from a handsome chestnut gelding, issuing instructions to the men before turning toward the house. There was an easy authority in his manner, a confidence born of competence rather than arrogance. Mrs. Abernathy bustled about, setting out bread, cold meats, cheese, and a large pot of hearty stew. "They'll be hungry as wolves," she commented. "Always are during carving." When Ethan entered the kitchen, he removed his hat and nodded a greeting to both women. "Mrs. Reynolds, I trust you slept well?" "Very well, thank you," Sophia replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious in Rebecca's altered dress. If Ethan noticed the garment, he gave no indication. "Dr. Sullivan should arrive within the hour. I've asked him to examine you as soon as he gets here." "That's very considerate, Mr. Calloway, but I'm quite well—" "Humor me," he interrupted gently. "After what you've been through, a medical opinion would ease my mind." Something in his tone made further protest seem churlish, so Sophia simply nodded her agreement. The meal was a lively affair, with the ranch hands discussing the morning's work, 2 difficult carvings successfully managed, fence repairs completed in the north pasture, plans for rotating grazing areas. Ethan participated actively in the conversation, demonstrating intimate knowledge of every aspect of the ranch's operations. Occasionally, one of the men would direct a polite question to Sophia, making efforts to include her without being overly familiar. After the meal, as the men filed back out to work, Ethan lingered in the doorway. "Would you care to see more of the ranch later, Mrs. Reynolds, after the doctor's visit?" The unexpected invitation surprised her. "I would like that very much." A rider approaching at an easy trot interrupted their conversation. "That'll be Sullivan now, Ethan said, stepping onto the porch to greet the newcomer. Dr. James Sullivan proved to be a kindly man in his 50s with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He greeted Sophia with professional courtesy, showing neither judgment nor excessive curiosity about her circumstances. "Let's have a look at you and the little one," he said after introductions were complete. "Mrs. Abernathy, perhaps we could use the downstairs guest room." The examination was thorough but respectful. Dr. Sullivan asked detailed questions about Sophia's health history, her husband's family medical background, and her pregnancy progress so far. "The baby seems healthy and properly positioned," he concluded, packing his instruments back into his medical bag. "But you, Mrs. Reynolds, are suffering from exhaustion and mild malnutrition. I'm prescribing rest, regular meals, and moderate exercise for the next several weeks." "Is there cause for concern?" Sophia asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Nothing that proper care won't address," Dr. Sullivan assured her. "You're young and fundamentally healthy. The child is active and of good size, but the last few months have taken their toll on your reserves." After the doctor departed, having left specific dietary recommendations with Mrs. Abernathy, Ethan found Sophia sitting in the rocking chair on the front porch. "Sullivan says you and the baby will be fine with proper care," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "You spoke with him about me?" Sophia asked, unsure whether to feel grateful or indignant. "Your health is now my responsibility," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "At least until your contract is fulfilled." Sophia studied his profile, struck again by the contradiction he presented. A hard-working rancher with the manners of a gentleman, a man who would spend $300 to save a stranger from a worse fate, yet insisted on framing it as a business transaction. "You mentioned showing me the ranch," she reminded him, eager to shift the conversation away from her health. Ethan nodded, rising to his feet. "Can you manage a short walk, or would you prefer to take the buggy?" "A walk would be welcome after so much confinement," Sophia admitted. They set off at a leisurely pace, Ethan carefully moderating his longer stride to accommodate her slower movements. He showed her the vegetable garden behind the house, the chicken coop managed by Mrs. Abernathy, and the small orchard of apple and pear trees just coming into bloom. "Rebecca planted those," he said quietly, watching the white blossoms dance in the gentle breeze. "She said every proper home should have fruit trees for shade in summer and pies in fall." "She sounds like a wise woman," Sophia observed, noting the softening of his expression when he spoke of his late wife. "She was," Ethan agreed simply. They continued walking toward a fenced meadow where several mares grazed with gangly-legged foals at their sides. "Spring brings new life everywhere you look," Sophia commented, watching a particularly bold foal kick up its heels before racing back to its mother's side. "It's why I love this season despite all the extra work," Ethan admitted. "Everything feels possible in spring." As they walked, Ethan explained the workings of the ranch, the careful breeding program he'd established for both horses and cattle, the rotation of pastures to maintain the health of the grasslands, the balance of crops they grew to supplement feed during winter months. "You've built something remarkable here," Sophia said, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful planning evident in every aspect of the operation. "It wasn't always this way," Ethan replied. "When I first came to Montana, I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a decent horse, and every mistake my father ever made as a lesson in what not to do." "No, your father was a rancher too." "A gambler, mostly," Ethan said with a grimace. "Had a small spread in Wyoming that he'd win and lose again twice over before I was 15. Taught me that land isn't something to be wagered. It's something to be nurtured." They had reached a small rise overlooking much of the property. Ethan stopped, gesturing toward the panoramic view. "This is why I named it Broken Sea. See that creek down there, how it breaks into 3 branches before coming together again? made me think of things broken that find their way back to wholeness. The unexpected poetry in his explanation touched Sophia deeply. That's beautiful. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. Rebecca thought so too. She was the one who encouraged me to keep the name. On their way back to the house, they passed a small fenced graveyard on a gentle slope surrounded by aspen trees. Sophia noticed Ethan's step falter slightly as they approached. "Rebecca?" she asked softly, understanding without being told. He nodded. "And our son? We never even had the chance to name him." Sophia felt a deep ache of sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Life continues," Ethan said simply, though his eyes remained on the two markers for a long moment before they resumed walking. By the time they returned to the house, Sophia had gained a new appreciation for both the ranch and its owner. Ethan Calloway was a man who had built something meaningful from nothing, who understood loss but hadn't been consumed by it, who treated his land and animals with the same care and respect he showed to people. The next 2 weeks fell into a pleasant rhythm. Each morning, Sophia would help Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, learning the routines of the ranch. In the afternoons, she often found herself sitting on the porch with mending or simply resting, as Dr. Sullivan had recommended. Sometimes Ethan would join her, bringing ranch ledgers to review or correspondence to answer. They would sit in comfortable silence or engage in conversations that grew increasingly personal as days passed. Sophia learned that Ethan had come to Montana after serving briefly in the army, determined to make his own way far from his father's destructive influence. He had worked as a ranch hand for 5 years, saving every penny before purchasing the small cabin and surrounding 50 acres that would become the nucleus of Broken Sea Ranch. In turn, she told him about growing up as the daughter of a schoolteacher in Minnesota, about meeting Thomas when he came to build shelves for her father's library, about their dreams of establishing a furniture-making business that would be passed down to their children. "Thomas had such beautiful plans," she said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "He could envision the future so clearly. I think that's why he borrowed so much. In his mind, success was inevitable." "Visionaries often struggle with practical details," Ethan observed without judgment. Yes, that was Thomas, exactly, so focused on the destination that he sometimes missed the pitfalls along the path. Sophia smiled sadly at the memory. "I should have paid more attention to our finances, but I trusted him completely." "Trust isn't a failing, Mrs. Reynolds." "Please," she said impulsively, "call me Sophia. After all these conversations, Mrs. Reynolds seems unnecessarily formal." Ethan looked slightly startled, then nodded. "Sophia, then, and you should call me Ethan, at least when it's just the two of us." The simple exchange of first names seemed to shift something between them, creating a new level of familiarity that was both comforting and slightly disquieting. One rainy afternoon, unable to sit on the porch, Sophia found herself exploring the bookshelves in the main room. Ethan's collection was extensive and eclectic, practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture alongside volumes of poetry, history, and fiction. She was so absorbed in examining the titles that she didn't hear Ethan enter until he spoke. "Rebecca was the reader in the family," he said, startling her slightly. "But I've developed the habit over the years." "You have wonderful books," Sophia replied, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. Thomas enjoyed stories, but he rarely had the patience to read them himself. "I used to read aloud to him in the evenings while he worked on small carvings." "Would you," Ethan began, then stopped himself. "Would I what?" He looked almost embarrassed. "I was going to ask if you might read aloud sometime. It's been a long while since I've heard the sonnets." The request was so unexpected and revealing that Sophia felt momentarily speechless. This man who had built a successful ranch from nothing, who commanded respect from hardened cowboys with just a look, was asking her to read poetry to him. "I'd be happy to," she said finally. That evening, after dinner had been cleared away and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Sophia and Ethan sat before the fire as rain drummed steadily on the roof. She read sonnets for nearly an hour, her voice gaining confidence as she progressed. Occasionally she would glance up to find Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Thoughtful, certainly, but with something more complex beneath the surface. When she finally closed the book, her throat slightly hoarse from the extended reading, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Thank you," Ethan said simply. Rebecca loved that particular collection. "She had excellent taste," Sophia replied. Then, gathering her courage, she asked the question that had been forming in her mind for days. "Will you tell me about her? About Rebecca?" Ethan looked surprised, then pensive. "What would you like to know? Anything you wish to share? Mrs. Abernathy mentions her sometimes, but always seems careful, as if afraid of causing pain." Ethan was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but steady. "Rebecca was from Chicago originally. Her father was a banker who lost everything in '73. She came west as a governess for a family in Helena. We met at a harvest dance." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. "She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes exactly, and she was the only woman there who didn't seem impressed by the local cattle baron who was showing off his wealth." "How long were you married?" 5 years, not nearly long enough." Ethan's gaze fixed on the fire. "She was sunshine personified, always seeing the best in situations and people, always finding reasons to be grateful. She turned this house into a home with little touches that I never would have thought of. Curtains that caught the light just so, flowers arranged to brighten dark corners, little notes hidden in unexpected places." "She sounds lovely," Sophia said softly. "She was, and she would have been an extraordinary mother." His voice caught slightly on the last word. "When we learned she was expecting, she immediately began planning. A nursery painted with woodland creatures, toys she ordered from catalogues, books of children's stories she collected." Sophia felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He nodded, acknowledgement of her sympathy. The hardest part was entering that nursery afterward, everything ready, waiting for a child who would never come. He drew a deep breath. "I closed the door and didn't open it again for nearly a year." "And now," Sophia asked gently, "now I can go in there without feeling like my chest is being crushed. Progress, I suppose." He looked at her directly. "What about you, Sophia? Have you prepared for your child's arrival?" The question brought Sophia back to her own reality with painful clarity. "I had started a small collection of things, knitted blankets, a cradle Thomas made, but after he died, and I realized how dire our financial situation was." She trailed off, remembering the day she had sold the beautiful cherrywood cradle to pay for food and rent. "I kept one blanket and a small wooden rattle. Everything else had to be sold." Ethan's expression darkened. "No child should enter the world without proper welcome." "Many do," Sophia replied pragmatically. "At least my baby will have shelter and food, thanks to your intervention." "Your baby will have more than mere necessities," Ethan said with sudden decisiveness. "Tomorrow we'll open the nursery. There's no sense in those things sitting unused when they're needed." Sophia stared at him in astonishment. "Ethan, I couldn't possibly." "You can, and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Rebecca would have insisted on it." The next morning brought sunshine after the rain, and a curious Mrs. Abernathy who had clearly been informed of Ethan's decision. "I'll need to air everything out and do a proper cleaning," she said, keys jingling in her hand as she led the way upstairs. The nursery was located at the end of the hallway, across from Ethan's bedroom. The door opened with a slight creak, revealing a room that had been prepared with obvious love and care. Pale yellow walls were adorned with hand-painted woodland creatures, rabbits, foxes, deer, and birds, in a whimsical forest scene. A beautifully crafted crib stood in one corner, a rocking chair beside it. Shelves held books and small toys, while a chest presumably contained baby clothes and linens. "Oh," Sophia breathed, one hand going to her mouth. "It's perfect." Mrs. Abernathy moved efficiently about the room, opening curtains and windows to let in fresh air. "Rebecca worked on those paintings for weeks," she commented, gesturing to the walls. "Said she wanted the baby to wake up to friendly faces. Every morning." Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled. "Everything should be here that you'll need. If there's anything missing, we can order it from the mercantile in town." "Ethan, this is too much," Sophia protested weakly, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture. "It's practical," he replied, echoing his words from their first night. The room and everything in it serve no purpose, sitting empty. But Sophia recognized the significance of what he was offering, not just the physical items, but access to the space that held so many of his hopes and dreams for a family that never came to be. It was a gesture of trust and healing that transcended practical considerations. "Thank you," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "I promise to treasure it as Rebecca would have." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening, a release of tension he probably hadn't even realized he was carrying. "She would have liked you," he said quietly, before turning and walking away. Later that afternoon, as Sophia sat in the nursery's rocking chair folding tiny garments that Mrs. Abernathy had washed and aired, she found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. Just weeks ago, she'd been facing a bleak future, sold to the highest bidder like property. Now she was preparing for her child's arrival in a beautiful home, surrounded by comforts she couldn't have imagined. The baby kicked vigorously as if sensing her thoughts. "We've been fortunate, little one," she murmured, rubbing her belly gently. "Mr. Calloway is a good man." "Talking to the baby already?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice came from the doorway. "That's good. Helps them know your voice." "Did Rebecca do that too?" Sophia asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, that was intrusive." "Not at all," Mrs. Abernathy said, entering the room with a stack of freshly laundered baby blankets. And yes, she did. Used to read stories aloud every evening. Said the baby should know Shakespeare and Dickens before even drawing breath. Sophia smiled at the image. She and I would have had that in common at least. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a speculative look. "You and Rebecca share more similarities than you might think." "How so?" "From everything I've heard, she was refined. Educated, she was kind," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, "and strong in the ways that matter most, just like you." Before Sophia could respond to this unexpected comparison, a commotion erupted downstairs. Boots on the wooden floor, men's voices raised in urgency. "Mr. Calloway, come quick, it's Johnson. Horse threw him bad out by the North Creek." Sophia and Mrs. Abernathy hurried downstairs to find Ethan already issuing rapid instructions. "Sullivan's making rounds at the Peterson place. Send Billy to fetch him immediately. Meanwhile, get Johnson to the bunkhouse and keep him still until I get there." As the men rushed to comply, Ethan turned to find the women watching anxiously. "Luke Johnson was breaking a new horse," he explained tersely. "Animal spooked at something and threw him into a ravine. Sounds like broken ribs at minimum." "Do you need help?" Sophia asked automatically. "I assisted our town doctor occasionally back home." Ethan looked momentarily surprised, then nodded. "Come with me. Mrs. Abernathy, prepare hot water and bandages." Together, they hurried to the bunkhouse, where two ranch hands were carefully settling their injured colleague onto a narrow bed. Luke Johnson was a young man, barely 20, with a shock of red hair now matted with blood from a gash on his forehead. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his face contorted with pain. "Ribs, for sure," Ethan muttered, examining the young man carefully. Possibly his left arm as well. Sophia moved to the head of the bed, gently cleaning the wound on Johnson's forehead with a damp cloth. "The cut isn't as bad as it looks," she reported. "Head wounds always bleed dramatically. I don't think he'll need stitches." For the next hour, they worked together to stabilize the injured cowboy, binding his ribs, splinting his arm, and making him as comfortable as possible until the doctor could arrive. Sophia moved with quiet efficiency, her previous experience evident in her calm, competent actions. When they had done all they could, leaving Johnson in the care of his bunkmates, Ethan walked Sophia back to the main house in thoughtful silence. "You handled that well," he finally said, as they reached the porch. "Where did you learn such skills?" "My father believed women should be useful as well as ornamental," Sophia replied with a small smile. "He encouraged my interest in medicine, though of course formal training was out of the question." "Of course," Ethan echoed, though his tone suggested he might not agree with that limitation. "You have a natural talent for healing." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "It feels good to be useful again." As they stood on the porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, Sophia felt a curious sense of rightness, as if the puzzle pieces of her life, so recently scattered by tragedy, were slowly finding new arrangements that might eventually form a complete picture again. Little did she know that the most significant piece was yet to be revealed, a connection between her past and Ethan's that would transform everything they thought they knew about each other and test the fragile bond forming between them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by the weekly mail delivery that connected the isolated ranches to the wider world. Sophia was arranging wildflowers in the parlor when she heard the rider approach, followed by Ethan's voice exchanging greetings. Outside, she thought nothing of it until he entered the house, his expression uncharacteristically troubled as he studied the envelope in his hand. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting aside the half-finished arrangement. Ethan looked up, seeming almost surprised to find her there. "This letter is addressed to you," he said, extending the envelope. "Care of Broken Sea Ranch." Sophia took it with confusion. "That's impossible. No one knows I'm here except—" Her voice trailed off as she recognized the precise, elegant handwriting. "Judge Harmon." "The county judge?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing. "How would he know your whereabouts?" "He handled the proceedings against me after Thomas died," Sophia explained, her fingers tracing the neat script. "He was surprisingly kind given the circumstances, recommended the labor contract over debtor's prison." "Some kindness," Ethan muttered, his distaste for the entire system evident. Sophia broke the seal with trembling fingers, unfolding the single sheet inside. As she read, her face paled visibly. "What is it?" Ethan asked, concern edging his voice. "Thomas's brother James," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's challenging the labor contract. Claims that as Thomas's closest male relative, any debts, and therefore any contracts made to settle those debts, should be under his authority. Can he do that?" "Judge Harmon says there's legal precedent," Sophia replied, scanning the letter again. "He's writing to warn me that James Reynolds has petitioned for a transfer of the contract to his name. The hearing is scheduled for next Monday in Willow Creek." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What kind of man is this brother-in-law of yours?" Sophia sank into the nearest chair, one protective hand moving to her belly. "James is difficult. He and Thomas were never close. James resented that Thomas inherited their father's tools and knowledge while he got the failing family farm. When Thomas and I married, James made his disapproval clear, said I was too educated, too opinionated to make a proper wife. Sounds like a man of limited vision, Ethan observed dryly. He's a hard man, Sophia agreed. His own wife left him after just 2 years, fled back to her family in Minnesota. No one's heard from her since. And now he wants control of your contract. Ethan's voice held a dangerous edge. Why? Out of familial duty to his brother's widow. Sophia shook her head. James doesn't believe in duty unless it benefits him directly. My guess is he sees an opportunity for free labor on that struggling farm of his. Or perhaps... She hesitated, reluctant to voice her darker suspicion. Perhaps, Ethan prompted. Perhaps he sees an opportunity for revenge, Sophia admitted quietly. He blamed me when Thomas stopped sending money to help with the farm, said I'd turned his brother against his own blood. Ethan paced the length of the parlor, his agitation evident in every line of his body. This is absurd. The contract was signed in good faith between consenting parties. No judge with any sense would invalidate it on the petition of a third party with no standing. In normal circumstances, I'd agree, Sophia said, refolding the letter carefully, but Judge Harmon warns that James has influential friends on the town council, men who owe him favors. Then we'll fight this with better lawyers, Ethan declared. I'll write to Helena tomorrow and engage the best legal counsel available. His immediate, unquestioning support brought unexpected tears to Sophia's eyes. Ethan, you've already done so much. This isn't your battle. It became my battle the moment I signed that contract, he countered firmly. I won't allow some vindictive farmer to undo what I've... He stopped abruptly, as if realizing his vehemence might reveal more than he intended. What you've what? Sophia asked softly. Ethan looked away, his profile etched against the afternoon light streaming through the window. What I've promised to protect, he finished, his voice low but resolute. Something warm unfurled in Sophia's chest at his words. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Over the past weeks, she had tried to guard her heart against developing feelings for Ethan Calloway. He was her employer, her contract holder, a man still mourning his dead wife. Any attachment would be inappropriate, impractical, impossible. Yet, in moments like this, when his innate decency and protective instincts revealed themselves so clearly, maintaining that emotional distance became increasingly difficult. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, as if expressing an opinion on the matter. Sophia winced slightly, drawing Ethan's concerned attention. "Are you in pain?" he asked, immediately moving closer. "No, just an enthusiastic little gymnast," Sophia replied, with a small smile, rubbing the spot where a tiny foot or elbow had momentarily distended her rounded belly. Ethan's expression softened. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering uncertainly. The request surprised her, but Sophia nodded, guiding his palm to the spot where the baby continued to move. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a definitive thump against his hand made Ethan's eyes widen with wonder. "That's remarkable," he murmured. "Remarkable and occasionally uncomfortable," Sophia admitted with a laugh, "especially at 3 in the morning." They remained like that for a long moment, his hand on her belly, her hand over his, the baby's movements creating a tangible connection between them. The intimacy of the gesture struck Sophia suddenly, and she pulled away, heat rising in her cheeks. "I should help Mrs. Abernathy with dinner preparations," she said, rising awkwardly from the chair. Ethan stepped back, his own expression unreadable. "Of course. And I should inform her of our trip to town next week. We'll all need to go for the hearing." "All?" Sophia questioned. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," Ethan said firmly. "Mrs. Abernathy will accompany us for propriety's sake, and I'll bring along 2 of the hands. James Reynolds needs to understand that you have support." The intensity in his voice left no room for argument. For a man who claimed their arrangement was merely practical, Ethan Calloway was demonstrating a level of commitment that seemed to transcend business considerations. As Sophia made her way to the kitchen, Judge Harmon's letter carefully folded. In her pocket, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Ethan Calloway. The realization brought equal measures of joy and trepidation. Joy because loving again had seemed impossible after Thomas's death. Trepidation because her future remained precarious, her life controlled by legal documents and men's decisions rather than her own choices. The week passed in a flurry of preparations for the journey to town. Ethan rode to Helena as promised, returning with a distinguished attorney named Blackwood who specialized in contract law. The lawyer spent hours reviewing the original contract, taking detailed notes and asking Sophia precise questions about her relationship with James Reynolds. "The legal argument is weak," Blackwood concluded after his review. "But Judge Harmon is right to be concerned about local politics. Small town justices are notoriously susceptible to influence, especially when prominent citizens apply pressure." "Then what's our strategy?" Ethan asked, his tone all business. "Two-pronged approach," Blackwood replied, shuffling his papers into a neat stack. "First, we attack the legal premise. A labor contract signed in good faith by capable adults is binding and cannot be transferred without consent of all parties. Second, we demonstrate that James Reynolds is motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate concern for his brother's widow." "And if those arguments fail?" Sophia asked. Quietly, Blackwood exchanged a glance with Ethan before answering. "Then we invoke the nuclear option. Mr. Calloway offers to buy out the contract completely, paying any remaining debts in full plus a premium. It would remove all legal justification for transferring the contract, though it would be costly." "The money is not the issue," Ethan said firmly. Sophia's head snapped up. "Ethan, no. You've already paid far more than—" "It won't come to that," he interrupted. "Blackwood will win with the primary arguments. This is just contingency planning." But as they set out for Willow Creek early Monday morning, Sophia couldn't shake her anxiety. The wagon had been fitted with extra cushions to make the journey more comfortable for her, now in her 8th month of pregnancy. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting on frequent stops to stretch and rest. Ethan rode alongside, alternating between quiet conversation with Sophia and discussions with Blackwood, who had joined their party. 2 of the most trusted ranch hands, Sam Wilson and Mike Taylor, followed at a discreet distance, their presence a silent statement of support and protection. As they crested the final hill overlooking Willow Creek, Sophia felt a complex surge of emotions. This had been her home for most of her married life, yet now it felt alien and vaguely threatening. The familiar buildings and streets no longer represented comfort or belonging, but rather the site of her deepest humiliations. "We'll stay at the hotel tonight," Ethan announced as they approached the town limits. "The hearing is scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." "The hotel?" Sophia echoed in surprise. The Willow Creek Hotel was the finest establishment in town, typically reserved for wealthy visitors or special occasions. "I won't have you sleeping in some boarding house," Ethan said firmly. "Not in your condition, and not with James Reynolds potentially lurking about." The wagon drew curious stares as it rolled down Main Street. Sophia kept her head high, though she felt the weight of judgment in many of the gazes directed her way. These were people who had once been neighbors and friends, who had attended her wedding to Thomas, who had offered condolences after his death. Yet when her fortunes fell, their support had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. At the hotel, Ethan secured 3 rooms, one for Sophia, one for himself and Blackwood to share, and one for Mrs. Abernathy. Wilson and Taylor would take turns keeping watch from the lobby throughout the night. "Is all this really necessary?" Sophia asked, as they gathered for dinner in the hotel's dining room, conscious of the stares from other patrons. "I don't take chances with safety," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the room with the habitual wariness of a man accustomed to anticipating threats. "Especially not with—" He stopped abruptly. "With what?" Sophia prompted. "With people I'm responsible for," he finished, though something in his tone suggested that wasn't his original thought. Dinner passed without incident, though the stiff formality of the hotel dining room made for a marked contrast to the comfortable meals they had shared at the ranch. Sophia found herself missing the easy camaraderie of the Broken Sea kitchen, where ranch hands joked and shared stories, while Mrs. Abernathy urged second helpings on everyone. As they finished their meal, the hotel manager approached their table, his expression apologetic. "Mr. Calloway, there's a gentleman in the lobby asking to speak with Mrs. Reynolds. Says it's urgent family business." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What's his name?" "James Reynolds, sir." Sophia felt her heart rate accelerate. "He's here." "You don't have to see him," Ethan said immediately, his hand moving instinctively to cover hers on the table. "Yes, I do," Sophia replied, gathering her courage. "Better to know what we're facing tomorrow." Blackwood nodded approval. "It might be advantageous to hear his arguments in advance. I'll accompany you both." The lobby of the Willow Creek Hotel featured comfortable seating arrangements around a large fireplace. James Reynolds stood with his back to the flames, his tall, angular frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. At 42, he was 8 years older than Thomas had been, with the same Reynolds features, strong jaw, straight nose, deep-set eyes, but none of the warmth that had animated his brother's expressions. "Sophia," he said as they approached, his voice carrying the same hard edge she remembered. His gaze flicked dismissively over her pregnant belly before settling on Ethan. "And you must be Calloway." "Mr. Calloway," Ethan corrected coolly. "And this is Mr. Blackwood, our attorney." James's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "Brought legal representation, did you? Seems an unnecessary expense for a straightforward family matter." "There's nothing straightforward about attempting to invalidate a legally binding contract," Blackwood interjected smoothly. "Nor does family enter into it, given that you've made no effort to contact Mrs. Reynolds in the 3 months since your brother's death." James's expression darkened. "I was not informed of Thomas's passing until weeks after the fact. By then, his widow had already entangled herself in this arrangement." He gestured vaguely between Sophia and Ethan, the implication clear and deeply offensive. Ethan took a half-step forward, but Sophia placed a restraining hand on his. "What do you want, James?" she asked directly. "Why pursue this now?" "Family duty," James replied, his tone suggesting anything but. "A Reynolds widow should be under Reynolds' protection. The law recognizes this principle, as the judge will confirm tomorrow." "And what would this protection entail?" Ethan asked, his voice deceptively calm. "A proper home with family," James answered, his eyes cold. "Work suited to a widow's station. Guidance in raising a child that carries the Reynolds name." "You've never married, Mr. Reynolds," Blackwood observed. "What experience do you have in raising children?" James's face flushed with anger. "My personal circumstances are irrelevant. The principle remains. A widow belongs with her husband's family, not sold to the highest bidder in some shameful spectacle." "A spectacle you made no effort to prevent," Sophia noted quietly. "You knew about the auction, James. Sheriff Blackwood sent notices to all known relatives weeks in advance." "I was indisposed," James muttered, his eyes shifting away momentarily. "Indisposed or indifferent?" Ethan asked sharply. "Either way, You forfeited any moral claim to Mrs. Reynolds's welfare when you failed to assist her in her time of need. The law recognizes blood ties above all else, James insisted stubbornly. The contract will be transferred to me tomorrow, and Sophia will return to her proper place. And where might that be? Sophia asked, one protective hand moving to her belly. Your farm is barely surviving, James. You've never approved of me, never shown the slightest interest in my well-being. Why should I believe your sudden concern is genuine? James' expression turned calculating. Perhaps it's not your well-being that concerns me, but the child's. A Reynolds heir deserves better than to be raised in the household of a stranger who purchased its mother like property. The words struck like physical blows, all the more painful for containing a kernel of truth. Sophia had indeed been purchased, like property, a reality that haunted her despite Ethan's kindness and respect. That will be enough, Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mrs. Reynolds is tired and should rest before tomorrow's proceedings. We have nothing further to discuss with you tonight. James's thin lips curved in another cold approximation of a smile. Very protective, aren't you, Calloway? One might wonder what special interest you have in my brother's widow. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice remained controlled. My interest is in upholding my legal and moral obligations to someone under my protection. Perhaps, if you understood such concepts, this conversation wouldn't be necessary. With that, he offered Sophia his arm and led her toward the stairs, leaving Blackwood to exchange a few final words with James. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been watching from a discreet distance, hurried to join them. That man has the warmth of a rattlesnake in January, she muttered as they climbed the stairs. Did you see how he looked at the baby bump? Like it was an inconvenience rather than his own niece or nephew. James never wanted children, Sophia confirmed quietly. He told Thomas once that Reynolds men weren't meant to be fathers, that they lacked the temperament for it. Sounds like a man who knows his own limitations at least, Ethan observed grimly. At the door to her room, Sophia paused, suddenly reluctant to be alone with her turbulent thoughts. Do you think he could win tomorrow? She asked, looking up at Ethan's face for reassurance. Something in her expression must have reached through his controlled exterior, for his features softened perceptibly. No, he said firmly. Blackwood is the best attorney in the territory, and right is on our side. But even if the impossible happened, if some legal technicality went against us, I would not allow James Reynolds to take you anywhere against your will. You couldn't stop it if the law— There are other solutions, Ethan interrupted, his voice low but intense. Legal ones, if somewhat unorthodox. Before Sophia could ask what he meant, Mrs. Abernathy gently urged her into the room. Time for rest, dear. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without adding exhaustion to our troubles. Sleep proved elusive despite her physical and emotional fatigue. Sophia lay awake for hours, her mind racing with fears and contingencies. What if James won? What if she was forced to leave the sanctuary she had found at Broken Sea Ranch? What if her baby was born under James's harsh governance rather than Ethan's protective care? When she finally drifted off, her dreams were troubled. Images of Thomas blending with Ethan, of James looming menacingly over a cradle, of an auction block where she stood alone while familiar faces turned away. She woke with the first light of dawn, feeling unrested but resolute. Whatever happened in the courtroom today, she would face it with dignity. For her child's sake, if not her own, she would not show fear or weakness before James Reynolds. Mrs. Abernathy arrived with a breakfast tray, her practical efficiency a comforting constant in this sea of uncertainty. Eat everything, she instructed firmly. That baby needs nourishment, regardless of what foolishness adults get up to in courtrooms. Sophia managed a small smile at this characterization. You have a gift for putting things in perspective, Mrs. Abernathy. Comes from living 70 years, the older woman replied, bustling about to help Sophia dress in one of Rebecca's gowns, a deep blue that had been carefully altered to accommodate her pregnancy while still appearing dignified and proper. Seen enough human nonsense to know most of it sorts itself out eventually, one way or another. By 9:30, their entire party had assembled in the hotel lobby. Ethan wore his best suit, the formal attire emphasizing his height and the breadth of his shoulders. Blackwood looked every inch the successful attorney in tailored clothes and gold watch chain. Even Wilson and Taylor had donned clean shirts and polished boots for the occasion. "Ready?" Ethan asked Sophia quietly as they prepared to leave. She nodded, drawing strength from the solid presence beside her. "As ready as I can be." The Willow Creek Courthouse was a modest brick building at the end of Main Street, its wooden steps already crowded with curious townspeople when they arrived. Sophia held her head high as she walked through the whispers and stares, Ethan's steady hand at her elbow, providing silent support. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she remembered, with worn wooden benches and faded American flags flanking. The judge's bench. James Reynolds already sat at one of the tables near the front, accompanied by a thin, nervous-looking man Sophia recognized as Herbert Mason, a local attorney of limited skill but considerable political connections. As they took their places at the opposite table, Sophia caught sight of familiar faces in the audience, former neighbors, the minister's wife who had denied her charity, even the banker who had foreclosed on her home after Thomas's death. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to disapproval to what might have been regret. Judge Harmon entered precisely at 10 o'clock, his black robes swirling around him as he took his seat at the bench. At 65, Harmon was a respected jurist with a reputation for fairness, though his deference to local political realities was well known. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The matter before us concerns the labor contract of Mrs. Sophia Reynolds, currently held by Mr. Ethan Calloway, and petitioned for transfer by Mr. James Reynolds, brother of the deceased Thomas Reynolds." As Mason presented James's case, Sophia listened with growing indignation to the twisted narrative he constructed. Poor James, devastated by his brother's death, determined to provide for his widow and unborn child, only to discover she had been sold to a stranger in a questionable arrangement that no respectable family could countenance. When Blackwood rose for their side, the contrast in legal acumen became immediately apparent. With methodical precision, he dismantled each of Mason's arguments, citing precedents, highlighting the legal integrity of the original contract, and subtly emphasizing James's conspicuous absence during Sophia's time of need. "Your Honor," Blackwood concluded, "Mr. Reynolds had ample opportunity to assist his brother's widow before any contract became necessary. His current claim of familial duty rings hollow when measured against his previous inaction. Furthermore, Mrs. Reynolds herself objects strenuously to the proposed transfer, and her welfare must surely be a primary consideration in these proceedings." Judge Harmon removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. Mr. Blackwood makes compelling legal arguments. However, Mr. Mason raises valid concerns about family cohesion and traditional arrangements. He replaced his glasses, peering over them at Sophia. "Mrs. Reynolds, would you care to address the court directly? Your perspective would be valuable." Sophia rose carefully, one hand instinctively supporting her rounded belly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to speak plainly, if I may." At the judge's nod, she continued, "My husband, Thomas, and his brother James were estranged for many years before Thomas's death. James made no secret of his disapproval of our marriage and has shown no interest in my welfare until now. 3 months after Thomas died, and only after learning that Mr. Calloway had secured my contract." She paused, gathering her thoughts. At Broken Sea Ranch, I have found safety, respect, and dignified work appropriate to my condition. Mr. Calloway has provided medical care, comfortable accommodation, and kindness that asks nothing in return. In contrast, James Reynolds has offered only vague promises and demonstrated clear resentment toward me personally and toward my unborn child. The child is a Reynolds," James interrupted loudly. "It belongs with Reynolds' blood." Judge Harmon gavelled for silence. "You will have your opportunity to respond, Mr. Reynolds. Please continue, Mrs. Reynolds." Sophia took a steadying breath. "Your Honor, I believe that my late husband would want his child raised in an environment of security and care, not one of resentment and obligation. I ask the court to respect the legal contract I entered into freely and to allow me to fulfill its terms under Mr. Calloway's supervision." As she resumed her seat, Ethan leaned close. "Well said," he murmured, his approval warming her despite the tension of the moment. Judge Harmon called for a brief recess to consider his decision. As they waited in the anteroom, Blackwood appeared cautiously optimistic. "Harmon is a traditionalist, but he's not a fool. The legal precedent clearly favors our position. And yet I notice you emphasizing the family cohesion angle in your rebuttal," Ethan observed shrewdly. Blackwood nodded. "Know your audience, Mr. Calloway. Harmon values traditional family structures. We needed to demonstrate that the Broken Sea represents a more functional family environment than James Reynolds' household could provide." Dedici, when court reconvened, the room fell silent as Judge Harmon adjusted his robes and cleared his throat. "This case presents interesting questions about the intersection of family obligation and contractual law. After careful consideration of precedent and the specific circumstances at hand, I find that—" A commotion at the back of the courtroom interrupted his ruling. All heads turned to see Sheriff Blackwood striding down the center aisle, his expression grave. "Begging the court's pardon," he called out, "but there's an urgent matter concerning this case that must be addressed immediately." Judge Harmon frowned at the interruption. "Sheriff, we are in the middle of—" "It concerns the parentage of Mrs. Reynolds's child, Your Honor," the sheriff insisted. "Information has just come to light that changes everything about these proceedings." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as all eyes turned to Sophia, who felt the blood drain from her face. What possible information could the sheriff have about her baby's parentage? Thomas was undeniably the father. They had been happily married and trying for a child for over a year before conception. As the sheriff approached the bench to confer privately with Judge Harmon, Sophia turned to Ethan in confusion and alarm. His expression had grown tense, his eyes fixed on the sheriff with an intensity that suggested he might be anticipating something specific. "Ethan?" she whispered urgently. "What's happening?" Before he could answer, Judge Harmon gavelled for order. "In light of this new information, the court will adjourn for 1 hour while I review these documents in my chambers. All parties are to remain in the building." As the judge departed, the courtroom erupted in speculation. James Reynolds pushed his way toward Sophia, his face contorted with anger and suspicion. "What trickery is this?" he demanded. "What lies have you told about my brother's child?" "I've told no lies," Sophia replied, instinctively shrinking. Back from his looming presence, Ethan stepped between them, his stance protective. "Step back, Reynolds. Whatever the sheriff has brought forward is clearly as much a surprise to Mrs. Reynolds as to anyone." But as the sheriff approached their table, the significant look he exchanged with Blackwood sent a jolt of realization through Sophia. This was planned, some strategy concocted between Ethan, the attorney, and apparently the sheriff himself. "What have you done?" she whispered to Ethan, a mix of fear and hope churning in her stomach. "What was necessary?" he replied softly. "Trust me, Sophia, please." As the crowded courtroom buzzed with speculation and James Reynolds conferred angrily with his attorney, Sophia found herself at the center of a storm whose nature she could not yet comprehend. Whatever revelation the sheriff had brought, whatever strategy Ethan had set in motion, it was about to change the course of her future and her child's in ways she could not begin to imagine. The hour of recess passed with excruciating slowness. Sophia sat rigid in her chair, her hands protectively cradled around her belly as her mind raced through possibilities. What documents could the sheriff possibly have produced regarding her baby's parentage? What necessary action had Ethan taken? The uncertainty was nearly unbearable. Ethan remained at her side, his steady presence both reassuring and confounding. When she tried to question him, he would only say, "Trust that everything I've done is to protect you and the child." Blackwood and the sheriff had disappeared into a side room for a hushed conference, while James Reynolds paced the corridor, like a caged animal, periodically casting venomous glances in their direction. "Whatever scheme you've concocted, it won't work," James spat as he passed their bench for the third time. "Blood is blood, and the law recognizes that above all else." "The law recognizes truth, Mr. Reynolds," Ethan replied calmly. "Something you seem only selectively acquainted with." Mrs. Abernathy squeezed Sophia's hand encouragingly. "Steady now, dear. Mr. Calloway knows what he's doing." When Judge Harmon finally returned to the bench, the courtroom fell into expectant silence. The judge's expression was inscrutable as he adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the assembled parties. "These proceedings have taken an unexpected turn," he began, his voice measured. "Sheriff Blackwood has presented this court with documentation that directly impacts our deliberations. Before I address these documents, I wish to hear from Mr. Calloway." Ethan rose, his expression calm but resolute. "Yes, Your Honor." "You were aware of these documents' existence prior to today's hearing?" "I was, Your Honor," Ethan confirmed. "And you deliberately withheld them until this moment?" "I instructed Sheriff Blackwood to present them only if it appeared the court might rule in Mr. Reynolds's favor," Ethan admitted. "I had hoped to resolve this matter without resorting to personal revelations." Judge Harmon's bushy eyebrows drew together. "You presume to anticipate this court's ruling, Mr. Calloway?" "No, Your Honor. I prepared for contingencies." The judge harumphed, but seemed to accept this explanation. "Very well. For the benefit of all present, I will summarize what has been brought to my attention." He lifted a stack of papers. "These documents include sworn affidavits from Dr. James Sullivan, Mrs. Margaret Abernathy, and 3 ranch hands from the Broken Sea establishment. They also include personal correspondence between the late Mrs. Rebecca Calloway and her cousin, Mrs. Sarah Mitchell of Chicago." Sophia felt a jolt of surprise at the mention of Rebecca. What could Ethan's deceased wife possibly have to do with her situation? "The collective evidence establishes a remarkable and legally significant fact," Judge Harmon continued. "Mrs. Sophia Reynolds, née Sophia Mitchell, is the first cousin of the late Rebecca Calloway, née Rebecca Mitchell." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Sophia stared at the judge in shock, then turned to Ethan, whose eyes never left her face. "Is this true?" she whispered. "I only confirmed it 3 days ago," he replied quietly. "When Mrs. Abernathy recognized your maiden name in conversation, she remembered Rebecca speaking of her cousin Sophia, who had become a teacher in Minnesota." Judge Harmon continued over the rising murmurs. "This familial connection, while surprising, has direct bearing on our proceedings. Under territorial law, when a pregnant widow has blood relations through either her own family or her husband's, those relations have priority consideration in matters of guardianship and contract oversight. James Reynolds jumped to his feet. "I am the brother of her husband. My claim clearly takes precedence over some distant connection to Calloway's dead wife." "Not according to the law, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Harmon replied sternly. "The statutes specifically state that in cases where competing familial claims exist, the welfare and expressed preference of the widow herself shall be the determining factor." He looked directly at Sophia. "Mrs. Reynolds, were you aware of this connection to the Calloway household?" Still reeling from the revelation, Sophia could only shake her head. "No, Your Honor. I knew my cousin Rebecca had married and moved west, but we lost touch years ago. I had no idea she was." Her voice caught as she looked at Ethan. "I had no idea she was your Rebecca. And now that you are aware of this connection, does it influence your preference regarding your contract?" Sophia straightened in her chair, finding unexpected strength in this new knowledge. "It confirms what I already felt, Your Honor. The Broken Sea Ranch has become a home to me, a place where my child will be welcomed and cherished. This revelation only strengthens my desire to remain under Mr. Calloway's protection rather than transferring to Mr. Reynolds's authority." Judge Harmon nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Given these circumstances and Mrs. Reynolds's clear preference, this court finds no legal or moral justification for transferring the labor contract from Mr. Calloway to Mr. Reynolds. The petition is denied." The sharp crack of the gavel punctuated his ruling, but it was nearly drowned out by James Reynolds's shout of outrage. "This is a fabrication," he snarled, his face contorted with fury. "Convenient papers appearing at the last moment, suspicious family connections no one knew about. Until today. I demand an investigation." "You are out of order, Mr. Reynolds," Judge Harmon warned. "This court has reviewed the evidence and found it credible. My ruling stands." James whirled to face Sophia, his finger jabbing accusingly in her direction. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Even before Thomas died, you were plotting your escape, making connections with wealthy ranchers who could buy your freedom." Ethan moved with surprising speed for a man his size, placing himself between Sophia and her brother-in-law. "That's enough, Reynolds. You've lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you can muster and leave Mrs. Reynolds in peace." For a moment, it seemed James might physically attack Ethan, but Sheriff Blackwood's timely appearance at his elbow seemed to deflate his rage. With a final venomous glare, James stormed from the courtroom, his attorney scurrying in his wake. As the spectators began to disperse, buzzing with the dramatic turn of events, Sophia remained seated, her mind struggling to process everything that had transpired. "Rebecca was my cousin," she said softly, more to herself than to Ethan, who stood nearby. "All this time." Ethan knelt beside her chair, bringing his face level with hers. "I should have told you as soon as Mrs. Abernathy made the connection, but I wanted absolute confirmation before raising the issue, and then Blackwood suggested it might serve better as a legal strategy. When Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that Rebecca's father lost everything in '73, Sophia recalled, understanding dawning. That's when Uncle Frederick's bank failed. I remember my father sending money to help them. But Rebecca and I lost touch after she moved west to take that governess position. In Helena, Ethan confirmed, where I met her at that harvest dance. The coincidence seemed almost too perfect to be real. How did you confirm it? Your maiden name, your father's profession as a teacher, the timing of your move to Minnesota, all the details matched what Rebecca had told me about her favorite cousin. Then we found this." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small photograph, yellowed with age. It was among Rebecca's keepsakes. The photograph showed two young women in their late teens, arms linked, smiling at the camera. One was undeniably Rebecca, her fair beauty evident even in the faded image. The other was Sophia herself, a decade younger but unmistakable. I had forgotten about this, Sophia whispered, touching the image gently. It was taken the summer, before Uncle Frederick lost everything, when Rebecca came to stay with us for a month. She kept it all these years, Ethan said softly. Said it reminded her of happier times. A sudden realization struck Sophia. The nursery, those books, the toys. Rebecca ordered those from Chicago, didn't she? From the same stores where we used to go shopping together as girls. Ethan nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. She said her cousin would approve of her selections, that you both had always agreed on what children should read and play with. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, a complex mixture of grief for the cousin she had lost without knowing and gratitude for the unexpected connection that had now saved her from James's clutches. "Why didn't she ever write to me after she married you?" Sophia asked, wiping her eyes. "We could have reconnected, shared our lives." "She tried," Ethan revealed. "Twice she sent letters to your last known address in Minnesota, but they were returned unopened. After that, she assumed you had moved on, and perhaps didn't wish to maintain the connection." "I had already married Thomas and moved west by then," Sophia realized. "If only I had thought to send announcements to extended family. But so much was happening, and we lost touch with so many people during those years." Mrs. Abernathy approached, her weathered face wreathed in a satisfied smile. "Judge Harmon wants to know if you'll be returning to the ranch today or staying in town overnight." Ethan looked to Sophia, clearly leaving the decision to her. "What would you prefer?" For the first time since the auction block, Sophia felt the sweet weight of making her own choice. "I'd like to go home," she said simply, "to the ranch." The journey back to Broken Sea seemed transformed by the day's revelations. What had been beautiful landscape before now carried deeper meaning. This was the land Rebecca had loved, the mountains she had watched through changing seasons, the streams she had crossed in all weather to build a life with Ethan. As the wagon rolled through the ranch gates late that afternoon, Sophia felt a sense of homecoming she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. This place that had been a refuge of necessity now revealed itself as something more profound, a connection to family she had thought lost, a continuation of Rebecca's legacy. "I still can't believe it," she said, as Ethan helped her down from the wagon. "Of all the ranchers who might have attended that auction, of all the pregnant widows who might have stood on that platform." "Perhaps it wasn't entirely chance," Mrs. Abernathy suggested, retrieving her bags from the wagon bed. "Rebecca always said there were no true coincidences, only patterns we're not wise enough to recognize until after they've played out." That evening, after a quiet dinner celebrating their courtroom victory, Sophia found herself drawn to the nursery. The room that had once represented Ethan and Rebecca's unfulfilled dreams now held new significance. Her cousin had created this space with love and hope, envisioning a future that had been cruelly denied to her. Now, by some twist of fate or divine intervention, Sophia would bring that vision to partial fulfillment. Not with Rebecca's child, but with one connected to her by blood nonetheless. She was arranging baby clothes in the small dresser when Ethan appeared in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about contracts and obligations." Sophia tensed, slightly uncertain where this conversation might lead. "What about them?" "They're necessary in business and law, but inadequate for other matters." He stepped into the room, his usual confidence seemingly tempered with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Sophia, these past weeks have shown me that life can take unexpected turns. Connections we never anticipated can form, offering second chances. We don't deserve—" "Ethan, what are you saying?" He moved closer, his gaze steady on her face. "I'm saying that I would like to tear up your labor contract. Not because I wish to release you from obligation, but because I wish to offer you something else entirely." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "What would you offer instead?" "A choice," he said simply. "To stay or go as a free woman, beholden to no one, and if you chose to stay—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "If you chose to stay, I would offer my name, my protection, and whatever affection you might be willing to accept from a man who never expected to love again after losing Rebecca." The word love hung in the air between them, unexpected and transformative. Sophia had come to respect Ethan, to appreciate his kindness and integrity, to feel safe in his presence. But she had not dared to name the deeper emotions growing within her, nor to hope that he might return them. "You're offering marriage," she clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm offering a partnership," Ethan corrected gently. "One based on mutual respect and growing affection rather than legal obligation. Your child would have my name and share in everything I possess. You would have the security of a binding commitment rather than a temporary contract. And He hesitated. "I would have the privilege of building a family with someone who has reminded me that life continues even after devastating loss." Sophia's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the baby stirred, as if sensing the momentous conversation. "What about Rebecca? I would never want to replace her in your heart." "You couldn't," Ethan said honestly. "Just as I know I could. Never replace Thomas in yours, but perhaps that's not what either of us needs. Perhaps we need someone who understands that love isn't diminished by having loved before, it's enriched by it." The wisdom in his words resonated deeply with Sophia. She had feared that loving again would somehow dishonor Thomas's memory. But standing in this nursery that Rebecca had created with such hope, she understood that honoring the past and embracing the future weren't mutually exclusive propositions. "The coincidence of our connection through Rebecca feels almost too perfect," she said, still marveling at the revelation, "as if someone were arranging the pieces of our lives to fit together." "Rebecca would have enjoyed that thought," Ethan said with a small smile. "She always believed in patterns and purposes beyond our understanding." "What would she think of us?" Sophia asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind. Ethan's expression softened. "I think she would be pleased that two people she loved found each other, even through such unlikely circumstances. Rebecca never wanted me to spend my life alone. She made me promise I wouldn't, though at the time I couldn't imagine ever keeping that vow." His honesty touched Sophia deeply. This wasn't a man making impulsive decisions based on momentary feelings, but one who had thought carefully about what he was offering and why. "I don't need your answer tonight," Ethan continued, sensing her need for time to process. "This is a decision that affects not just your future but your child's as well. Take all the time you need to—" "Yes," Sophia interrupted, the certainty in her heart suddenly crystal clear. "My answer is yes, Ethan. I choose to stay, not because of contracts or obligations or even family connections, but because here, with you, I've found something I thought was lost forever, hope for the future." The smile that transformed Ethan's face in that moment was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then radiant with unmistakable joy. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "This isn't about gratitude or security. Those things matter," Sophia acknowledged honestly, "but they're not why I'm saying yes. I'm saying yes because in these weeks at Broken Sea, I've come to admire the man. You are, your integrity, your compassion, your quiet strength. I'm saying yes because the thought of building a life with you brings me joy rather than just relief." Ethan's hands tightened on hers. I never expected this. When I bid at that auction, I only knew I couldn't stand by and watch Walsh take you. I had no idea that decision would lead us here. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are doorways to the best ones, Sophia said softly. My father used to say that darkness isn't the absence of light, it's just the space between stars, necessary so we can see their brilliance more clearly. Ethan's expression grew tender. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Sophia. Agreed. He would have liked you. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, making Sophia laugh despite the solemnity of the moment. I think someone else approves as well. Ethan placed his hand gently on her rounded belly, wonder spreading across his features as the baby responded with another kick. Already strong-willed, he observed with a smile. Like both parents, I imagine. Both parents, Sophia repeated, the words filling her with warmth. Yes, I suppose that's what we'll be. If you're willing, Ethan said carefully, I'd like to adopt the child legally. Not to erase Thomas's memory, but to ensure there's never any question about inheritance or family standing. The thoughtfulness of this offer, protecting her child's future while still honoring its biological father, confirmed for Sophia that she was making the right choice. I would be honored for my child to bear the Calloway name, she said sincerely, and I think Thomas would approve, knowing his child would be raised with such care and consideration. As evening shadows lengthened across the nursery floor, Ethan and Sophia remained talking, making plans for their shared future that extended far beyond the immediate practicalities of marriage. They spoke of expanding the ranch operations, of educational opportunities for the child, of creating traditions that would honor both their past losses and their new beginnings. When Mrs. Abernathy found them there an hour later, she took in their clasped hands and radiant expressions with knowing satisfaction. Well, it's about time, she declared, hands on her hips. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar together to get things moving along. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and uninhibited in a way Sophia had never heard before. Your matchmaking skills weren't required after all, Mrs. Abernathy. We managed to find our way without intervention. The older woman snorted, though her eyes twinkled. If you think I haven't been intervening since the day you brought this girl home, you're not nearly as observant as I gave you credit for, Ethan Calloway. 2 weeks later, on a perfect spring morning with mountain wildflowers carpeting the ranch meadows, Sophia and Ethan were married in a simple ceremony on the front porch of the Broken Sea main house. Dr. Sullivan stood as Ethan's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy served as Sophia's matron of honor. The ranch hands had polished their boots and donned clean shirts for the occasion, forming a semicircle of friendly faces as Judge Harmon performed the ceremony. Sophia wore a dress of pale blue silk, not Rebecca's wedding gown, which they had. Both agreed should remain preserved in memory, but a new creation, commissioned from the best dressmaker in Helena. Ethan had insisted on the expense, saying, this isn't an ending or a replacement of what came before. It's a new beginning that deserves its own traditions. As they exchanged vows, Sophia felt the baby move within her, a gentle reminder of the unique circumstances that had brought them to this moment. This child, conceived in one marriage, would be born into another, a living bridge between past and future, between what was lost and what had been found. By the authority vested in me, Judge Harmon proclaimed with evident satisfaction, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride. Ethan's kiss was gentle, yet conveyed a depth of emotion that needed no words. Gratitude for second chances, joy in newfound connection, and promises for the future they would build together. The celebration that followed was modest but heartfelt, with Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen producing a feast that would be talked about for months to come. Even some of the townspeople from Willow Creek made the journey to offer congratulations, their initial judgment softened by the romantic story of cousins unknowingly connected and a widower finding love again through extraordinary circumstances. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Sophia and Ethan stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in golden light. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I thought possible 6 months ago," Sophia replied honestly. "When I stood on that auction platform, I thought my life was ending. I couldn't imagine finding joy again, or purpose, or—" She hesitated, still somewhat shy about expressing her deepest feelings. "Or love?" Ethan supplied softly. "Or love," she agreed, looking up at him with a smile. "Especially not with the man who bought my contract." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I want you to have this," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded document. "Consider it a wedding gift." Sophia unfolded the paper to find her labor contract, marked across with a bold "fulfilled" and Ethan's signature. "But I've only been here a few months," she protested. "The contract was for 5 years. Marriage fulfills all outstanding obligations," Ethan explained. "You're no longer bound by that document, Sophia. You're here because you choose to be, not because of any legal requirement." The symbolic importance of his gesture brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for understanding why that matters to me. I want our marriage to begin without shadows," Ethan said simply. "Equal partners building something together, not an owner and—" Together they placed their daughter in the cherrywood cradle, a physical manifestation of their unique story, one man's craftsmanship preserved through another man's thoughtfulness, creating a resting place for a child who would grow up knowing she was cherished for exactly who she was. As moonlight filtered through the nursery window, painting silver patterns across the floor Rebecca had once decorated with woodland creatures, Sophia and Ethan stood with arms entwined, watching their daughter sleep. Two people who had each lost what they treasured most, who had found each other through extraordinary circumstances, who had built something new and precious from the fragments of broken dreams. The auction that had seemed like the lowest point of Sophia's life had become, through courage and compassion and unexpected connection, the doorway to a future brighter than she had dared to imagine. From desperation had come deliverance, from loss had come love, from an ending had come a beginning worth embracing with her whole heart. And as Ethan drew her close in the moonlit nursery, Sophia knew with unshakable certainty that sometimes life's darkest moments were simply the spaces between stars, necessary darkness that allowed the true brilliance of human resilience, compassion, and love to shine more brightly against the night. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.